So SANKOFA tells us, go back and fetch it. We must look back to the past that we may understand how we became what we are and move forward to a better future. So we're here in the winter solstice, and why is it important to understand cycles? As Mkhulu said, we've lost a lot of this knowledge of knowing why does the winter solstice have any relevance to us? And that is because of the law of cycles. Let us come into the human body. Whether you go into any of the organ systems, be it the heart, be it the lungs, be it the kidneys or the liver or the intestines, we will realize that everything forms or moves according to a certain cycle or a certain rhythm. We know that our heart beats, and we know that this beat is felt in our pulse. And when this pulse is happening, we know that we're alive. We know that our lungs move in and out and in and out. And when we have the cycle of in and out, we know that we're alive. And this is the same for any of the other cycles in the internal body, in the internal organs. If there are cycles happening within us, we know we're alive. The minute that pulse stops, we know we are dead. And we can take it even deeper into the cellular system. If we look under the microscope, we will see that the different cells also operate according to certain cycles, whether it is in the movement of electrolytes in the body, you name it. Cycles are what make us alive. The movement from one phase to the other, into the same phase into the other, is what keeps us alive. This is the breath of life. This is the heartbeat of life. And here is a cycle that's very important, and that is known to more than 50% of who we are here on this platform, and 50% in general. And that is the menstrual cycle. Now, the menstrual cycle is that which is experienced by a woman or a young girl post-puberty and pre-menopause, where every month we have a movement from the follicle stage to a maturing follicle, to ovulation, to a space where the corpus luteum then degenerates into what becomes an outflow of blood. And this has often been called a moon cycle. Why? Because it is aligned to the cycles of the moon. What is very interesting about this particular cycle is that it moves according to the very cycles that Mkhulu spoke to us about. When we are in the follicular phase, we are in our inner spring. We, at the beginning of the follicular phase of the menstrual cycle, that is, we start at the spring equinox. When we get to the ovulatory phase, that is the beginning of the summer solstice. It is our inner summer. That is when we have the greatest potential to seed and to give birth. When we go to the luteal phase, as we're starting to see the egg starting to degenerate, we go into autumn. It is the waning moon, and that is the autumn equinox. And then we go into the top one there, which is the menstrual phase. And that is our inner winter, when we're purging blood from our systems. This is the new moon, and this is the winter solstice. So where we are in the cosmos or in the planet today is the menstrual phase of the planet. It is our inner winter. It is the winter solstice. It is that time when we cannot grow anything, as Mkhulu said, which is different from the summer solstice when we can plant, in order to be able to come alive. But it is that time when the sun returns so that it can begin to grow, towards the summer solstice. So what is also interesting and lesser known is that men also go through cycles. They also have cycles, but it's not a lunar cycle like the women. Men have a solar cycle because the testosterone in men's bodies moves according to daily cycles, in its waning and in its amplifying. So that which makes a man is governed by the sun, in as much as that which makes a woman is governed by the moon. And when the man's testosterone is moving according to the cycles of the sun, it helps with hair growth. It helps with muscle growth and strength and endurance. It helps with bone mass density. It helps with mood, confidence, cell function. It helps with red blood cell production. but it also helps with the ability to seed that egg, which the woman has in her menstrual cycle, that then allows new life to happen. So within us as humans, we are always going through cycles, whether it is the moon cycles, especially attributed to women, or whether it is the solar cycles, especially attributed to men. This is why in our indigenous African cultures, we know that the moon is the feminine entity and the man, the sun, is the masculine entity. And when the moon and the sun bring life, that will be birthed into the future. But our body cycles are not the only cycles that are. We have the cycles of the moon that goes around the planet between 28 to 30 days. And for those who are women will know, this is roughly how long our own lunar cycles or monthly cycles happens, directly aligned to the cycles of the moon. In the olden days, when women were completely aligned to nature, women's cycles would follow accurately the phases of the moon. But because of all the disturbances that we have now, we find that we as women are cycles all over the place, they're irregular, and they're completely out of alignment with the moon. So if we're out of alignment with the very source of life that we're on, how can we expect to be able to sustain, and how can we be able to restore, and how can we be able to regenerate and reproduce for the future? And then we have other cycles. We have all the planets, including our planet, which cycles around the sun, the masculine principle. And we know that depending on how close these planets are to the sun, the greater their year or the shorter their year. And we know that our particular year, our solar year, is about 365 days. And it is split into what has been bastardized into 12 months, but it's actually 13 months, you know, that is formed as the cycles of the solar year. And then we have even more cycles. Our solar system cycles through the Milky Way in that galaxy. And then that galaxy also cycles through the cosmos. So everything is cycling. The cells in us are cycling. Our body organs are in cycling, you know, in the same way as we are cycling, you know, around the planet, and we are cycling around the cosmos. So everything is cyclical. As above, so below. That as within, so without. That was our second law that we were using. So what then is the winter solstice? We have shown that the winter solstice is the menstrual cycle of the woman, or the menstrual cycle of the planet, so to speak. And what we know about our planet is that on the one hand, it rotates upon the north-south axis. It is rotating around itself. It is always moving around. And this rotation is what causes the cycle of day and night. But we also know that our planet revolves around the sun. So there's this two cycles that are happening. There's this rotation of the Earth on its axis, and there's also a revolution around the sun. And these two are what caused what Mkhulu showed us, which is the four main cardinal points. It is our winter solstice, our winter equinox, our autumn equinox, our spring equinox, and our summer solstice. So the winter solstice, where we are today, is the time when the Earth has its maximum tilt away from the sun. As we said, it rotates upon its axis. And this happens twice a year, once in the summer solstice and once in the winter solstice. Here in the winter solstice is the time when our planet is moved furthest away. It's tilting furthest away from the sun. And because it is tilting furthest away from the sun, we have what we have today, which is our shortest day of the year, before we start the cycle towards coming into our longest day, which will happen around this time in December. So once again, we've spoken about how there are four cardinal points. There's the autumn equinox, there's the vernal equinox or the spring equinox, there's the summer solstice and the winter solstice. And this is all around how, one, the planet rotates on its own axis, and two, how it revolves around the sun. everything is cyclical. If there are no cycles, we would be dead. This just illustrates that a bit better. If there are no cycles, we will be dead. Now, what is very interesting is sometimes we have an interesting effect when we see the moon and the sun coming in conjunction. And today was such a day. It was a day when we had annular solar eclipse, which happened around about 7 o'clock, just before 7 o'clock this morning. And this is when we see the moon and the sun in conjunction. You know, they're aligned with each other. This particular equinox that we had today is called an annular, a ring of fire. We were not able to see it from here in Southern Africa, but this is what was happening. You know, so there are times when the sun and the moon come into absolute conjunction. And this is time when the masculine and the feminine also come into conjunction. What a powerful day we are in today. So let's enter into a bit more depth about what we've been speaking about. Everything that we've been speaking about right now, the cycles that we've been speaking about, the Ubuntu that we've been speaking about, is premised on the concept of Neter. Neter is the all-pervasive being, the supreme being that exists and subsists through everything. It is the force that brought us into existence. It is the force that brought itself into existence that it could learn to know itself a bit better. So even the highest, most supreme being seeks to know itself. That is why know thyself, an axiom that was put into Kemet. Neter, as we know from hieroglyphics, or when we speak the hieroglyphics, Neter does not use the consonant, the vowels. So we have it as NTR, as the abbreviation for what Neter is. And when we look at this, we realize that if we take the vowels out of nature, Neter is what the Latin used in order to form what they call nature. So everything that is around us, everything that we see, touch, see, drink, smell is Neter. Nature is Neter, and we're a part of nature, in as much as our nature is the nature of Neter. So actually what our great ancestors of Kemet told us is that we are God. We are Nkulunkulu. We are Mudimu. We are Mwari. We are God. We are God in the same way that a teaspoon of seawater is to the ocean. It has exactly the same qualities. We have all those qualities. So why do we need to know ourselves? Why do we need to go back to the knowledge? It's so that we can realize the God that we are, so that we can say, I am Oser, I am God. The only way to do this is through a principle that was the all-pervasive principle that permeated through Kemet, and that is the principle of Ma'at. We actually spoke about Ma'at earlier when we spoke about Ubuntu. Ma'at is the concept that predated or post-dated Ubuntu, because Ubuntu, as we know, is started here in the South, but Ma'at is exactly the same principle. And it is the principle of truth. Truth, it is the principle of divine law. It is the principle of love, because love is divine law and the divine law is truth. And it is the principle of harmony. It is the principle of interconnectedness, interrelatedness, and interdependence. And if we see that this is the law that permeates everything, then how can I be separate from you, Mkulu? How can I be separate from my neighbor? How can I be separate from the ground, from the tree? How can I be separate from the poor people on the other side of the fence? How can I be separate from those who are dying? How can I be separate from the ancestors? And how can I be separate from those who are to come? This is the law of Ma'at. Yesterday as today, tomorrow as today. That is Ma'at. And Ma'at tells us that Men'eb and M'Onk and Ma'at, which is that we must have a stable heart in order to live this truth. And how does Ma'at do this? Ma'at is often depicted as a heart which is weighed against a feather. Because if you want to live truth, you cannot have a heavy heart. You must be able to be light. You must be able to be balanced. You must be able to fly. You know, because if you take many feathers together, you form wings, you know, and you're able to fly. And when you're able to fly, you're able to see from a circumspect view. You're able to see the full totality of all there is. You're able to come into true knowledge. You can only do that if your heart as light as a feather. So what I was asked to do today, excuse me, is to speak about the deities of the winter solstice. But before that, let me go into the fact that nature, which is neter, is often made up of polarities. It is often made up of equal and opposite energies. Here we've got two equal and opposite energies. We've got the energy of fire and we've got the energy of water. We also have the energy of cool and we have the energy of moist. We have the energy of hot and we have the energy of dry. This is what we spoke about when we spoke about kuntu within Ubuntu. It is these modalities, which can either burn us or cool us. And so when we talk about any deity, we also look at them according to which of these elements they exhibit. Are they cool? Are they water? Are they fire? Are they hot? Are they dry? The first deity that is relevant to the winter solstice is that of Sekret. Sekret is the deity that governs spiritual power. Sekret is the deity that governs omnipotence. When we speak about omnipotence, and we know that Christianity took our Trinity and spoke about how we have the omniscient, the omnipotent, and the omnipresent. Omnipotence is that which exists with the deity called Sekret. Sekret is spiritual power. Sekret is deep concentration, is stability. Sekret is the one who governs destiny. Sekret is the one who governs cycles that we've spoken about. Sekret is the one who governs structure and limitations. She is the one who governs the hard-working, the patience, the one who governs the elders, as we've spoken about Mamleta, who is the elder who holds this together. She is holding the place of Sekret, for us here. Sekret is the one who organizes. And Sekret is the one who governs time. And time is what we're speaking about when we're speaking about the calendar, the African calendar that Khulu Nsingiza spoke to us about. Know that the calendar is an instrument that organizes the concepts of time and periodicity. And we know that there are three types of calendars. There's a lunar calendar, which is synchronized to the motion of the moon. There's a solar calendar, which is synchronized to the motions of the stars, of the sun, rather. There's a lunisolar calendar, which is synchronized to both the moon and the sun. And this is what they used in Kemetic. They used a dual system. But they went even further. We also have a calendar that is a stellar calendar that is synchronized to the stars. So at any particular time, we're moving in cycles with the moon, we're moving in cycles with the sun, and we're moving in cycles with stars. And when we do this, we are living according to the principles of Sekret. The next deity that we would like, or it's actually a duality of deities that are relevant to the winter solstice, are two equal and opposite deities. And this is Nut and this is Geb. Now Nut is the one that is in that constellation. She is full of stars and she's bending over Geb, who is below. What is interesting about our Kemetic cosmology is when we come to the West often speaks about Mother Earth, right? What's interesting in our Kemetic cosmology is that our Kemetic cosmology says that the masculine, Geb, is masculine, and because it has been seeded by Nut, which is the feminine, because nature, neter, tells us that everything comes from the feminine. Everything comes from water. This is why I chose water as the element that's how it works with. So when we're speaking about the winter solstice, we have to look at these two polarities, these two equal and opposite energies. The first being Nut, which is the primordial waters. Nut is a deity that exists before time and before space. Nut is the one that seeds creation. Nut is the supreme darkness. When we look up into the night sky and see that blackness, that is Nut. And what is it that Nut seeds? She seeds the masculine, which is all the stars, the suns that we see in the sky. So Nut is that which governs us. And we know that Nut is the one who governs all the stars. So she governs the stellar calendar. But because our sun is actually a star, she also governs our solar calendar. And because she is the feminine, she also governs the lunar calendar. So Nut, primordial waters, that which exists before space and time, that which exists before that line, the Nile meridian of first time, is the deity, the most quintessential deity that is relevant to us today. Nut asks us to go back to the beginning, to go back to the source of all that is, to go back into the inner waters. And then when we are able to do that, we're able to manifest Geb. Geb is everything as we know it today. Geb is that which we can see, which can touch, we can think, we can feel, that is what Geb is. Geb is, Geb is what they call grandfather Geb. Geb is the earth and the planet as we see it today. Geb is the manifestation that comes forth from the waters of Nut. So if we're working with the winter solstice, we have to acknowledge the source, but we must also acknowledge the manifestation. And Geb is what we feel in our bodies. Nut is what we feel in our spirit. The next deities that are relevant to the winter solstice are Osar and Oset. As usual, as we've seen, that cycles are what happens when you move. I mean, our deities are literally just archetypal energies. And our ancestors told us that they always moved with their polarity. And it is not in an either or, it is both and function. So before I showed you fire and water, we know that fire needs water and water needs fire in order to bring balance, the balance of Ma'at. By the same token, Osar needs Oset in as much as Oset needs Osar. What is more interesting, as we see here in the center picture, is that Oset here, or Isis as the Greeks erroneously called her, and let me just make that point, is that when we use the Greek names for our deities, we lose the power of the deity. Because when we say Oser and when we say Oset, it is a mantra, it is a word of power. We're actually animating that particular deity into our being. By the time we say Osiris and Isis, we have completely lost the power that they hold. So please, can we go back to using the Kemetic words for our deities, because that will help us to animate. And the one who animates, who brings us the word of power, is Sekret, the one that I spoke of earlier. And we see here that Osar and Oset work together. You know, we know that Osar is the one who's fragmented into 14 pieces by Set, which is the cycle that we're in right now, who wants to ascend to the throne. And because he is fragmented into 14 pieces, Oset takes her sister, and they go together towards the ends of the earth to bring him back together again, to remember him, to bring the pieces back together, to remember, to remind him of who he is, and to remember, to remind him that he has been always a member of a collective. And this is what we do when we're here in the winter solstice. We're bringing together our fragments together, into this new moon, or into this new birth of the sun, the return of the sun. And when we do that, we're going into the darkness of Oser, when Oser comes back together after being remembered by Oset, the divine mother. The next deities that are relevant to the winter solstice are Heru and Heteru. And Heteru is sometimes called Nebhet, which might be a more familiar deity according to this system. And Heru is the principle of leadership. Heru is the divine masculine, whereas Heteru is the divine feminine. And when we come into our winter solstice, we're always looking at how are we coming into a place where we can seed our divine masculine. Who is it and what is it we're seeding when we're seeding the divine masculine? We're activating the testosterone within us when we're working with this. We're activating Heru within us. And when we activate Heru, once again, let's use our Kemetic names. Let's not say Horus, that means nothing. Let's say Heru. because then we're animating the deity. We know that we're animating he who comes together as the center of upper and lower Kemet. If we look here at the crown of Heru, we realize that he is wearing the crown of Oser, but he's also wearing the crown of Geb. So he's wearing both the crowns of upper and lower Kemet because he's the one who brings everything together. He's the one who has to be blinded by his uncle Set. He's the one who has to be almost killed as he tries to restore Ma'at when Oser has been killed. So when we come into the winter solstice, we're seeking to see how are we going to restore Ma'at by rousing the Heru within us, by arousing our ability to see, our circumspection, by arousing our inner leadership and our inner masculinity. By the same token, we're asking, how do we hold this with the water? Because winter solstice is the coldest time of the year, where, as Mkulu said, we know it was actually, we reached freezing point just here in Gauteng. In fact, we reached below freezing point, which is unusual for this part of the planet. And the one who governs cold is this deity, is actually the feminine. The feminine is the one who governs cold, whereas the masculine is the one who governs hot. So when we're here in the winter solstice, we know that Het Heru is the one who carries Heru to bring him to birth so that he can be birthed, you know, when we birth the sun, as we're doing here today in the winter solstice. So we need also to work with these two polarities of Heru as well as Heteru, the divine feminine, the one who becomes pregnant. We spoke about her earlier, the one who seeds the future, because only when we're pregnant can we give birth. And we can only become pregnant if the testosterone animates the sperm to impregnate the egg in order to bring forth life. So here at the winter solstice, we must also be looking at the Heru and the Het Heru within us. And then finally, we are in the cycle of Set. And Set has often been demonized within cosmology as an evil deity, because it is Set who is jealous and seeks to overthrow Oser, kills Oser, cuts him up into 14 pieces, throws them to the ends of the earth, ascends to the throne and creates chaos, the chaos that we see here today. In the planet, the chaos that we see in our nation, the chaos that we see in our own lives. Now, what is it that Set teaches us? Set teaches us that we have to go into the depths of our inner darkness, into our shadow, in order to find the light. Set reminds us that until we have the courage to look into that which seeks to break, that which seeks to fragment, that which seeks to set apart, that which seeks to bring hatred, that which seeks to bring separation, until we have the courage to face that, you know, the epitome and the darkness of humanity, the evil that exists in all of us, we will not be able to bring forth Ma'at, will not be able to bring forth love. So Set is the principle of the darkest time of the year. We're here in the darkest time of the year, the shortest day of the year, the longest night of the year, which is the winter solstice. And it is at this time that we really look into the depths of our darkness with Set, who may be seen as evil, but actually without Set, Oser would have never had to remind himself that he was one. He would have never had to have been fragmented so that he could know what the principle of unity was. Or Set would have never had to know that she was a magician that could bring life after death. You know, without Set, Heru would have never known that it's possible to be blind and then see again. So without Set, we would not be able to see that we may be in chaos right now, but there is a future. If we can use the chaos that we're in and use this energy of the winter solstice in order to seed a brighter future. And finally, the last deity that I'd like us to consider is Tehuti, and once again, please, can we not use the bastardization of the Greeks and call him, I can't even pronounce it, Thoth, whatever they call him, because that hides the mantra, the word of power, the Hekau of Tehuti. It is in the Hu. Now, Hu is the animating force that brings us wisdom and knowledge. When we say, know thyself, we are chanting Hu within us. So here in this winter solstice, in this time of the darkest hour, in the time of the longest night and the shortest day, we have to chant Hu through Tehuti so that we can animate our knowledge, our intuition, so that we can know ourselves, know thyself, and so that we can animate the future, which is to create something greater than the Kemet of yesteryear and create a greater Kemet, in the future to come. And we can only do that by animating Hu within us, Tehuti, the principle of wisdom. So this is the African calendar that we've spoken about. And our ancestors formed many of these African calendars, these calendars throughout our planet, our continent of Africa, starting here and moving up along the line of Zep-Tepi, the Nile meridian of first time. And this is part of what our ancestral heritage is. And when we come here, we realize that we go back to near the Makondro Mountains, near Swaziland, in the Lubombo Mountains. And there we find that the oldest lunar calendar in the world, was found just 350 kilometers away from us here in Johannesburg, Pretoria. The Lubombo bone was carved by young girls who realized that their monthly cycles took a particular time, and they made these notches into the fibula of a baboon. Remember, if we go back, one of the depictions of Tehuti is a baboon. So they used the principle of wisdom in order to be able to seek this power. And when they notched their cycles on this bone, they realized that, wait a minute, our cycles are aligned with the cycles of the moon. And they realized that within us, we are the moon. The woman, the feminine power, is the one which creates the tides, because we know that the moon is the one which governs the ocean. And then they realized the great power of the feminine and the great power to animate and to bring forth life, not just in the form of a human baby, but in the form of the great civilizations that we see, especially in Kemet. And so when we speak about the origins of the African calendar, we have to look here within the prepubescent African woman. She is the one who carries the calendar in her body. And this calendar, as long as she is not menopausal, is the one which animates the planet. When a woman becomes menopausal, she goes on to a different cycle. She starts going into now stellar cycles. So she's not exempt, from the cycles of life. And then we now go into the cycles of the moon, of the sun, and there we go to Inzala Yolanga. Let's not call it Adam's calendar, because Adam's calendar means nothing. But Inzala Yolanga tells us that this is the birthplace of the sun. And by calling it this, Baba, our great Sanusi Credo Mutwa must have known a great secret, firstly about what that point is where that calendar was built. Also, guess what? Just about 350 kilometers from where we are here in Johannesburg or Pretoria, and what it's made of, that particular stone, which is dolerite, which has got a particular frequency that is resonant with the sun, but it's also resonant with the stellar systems, because remember, the sun is actually just a star, So this site that we have is the original site which birthed the sun. What does that mean? How can a single site in our small little country, in our small little, Africa, have birthed the whole sun, which animates the whole planet? What would be more interesting is to know that not far from Inzala Yolanga, we have the Makondro Mountains, which show us that that is the place on which the UNESCO has recently declared as a heritage site, because guess what? It contains the oldest known cells of the planet Earth. So the origins of Kemet is here, just here where we are, where our oldest lunar calendar was found, which is governed by the feminine, where our oldest solar calendar is found, which is governed by the masculine. And this Inzala Yolanga, this monolith, is much, much, much older than Stonehenge or any of the other monolithic stone calendars of the world that have been celebrated. These are the two center stones that connect to the stars, and, animate the energy of the planet, from the core of the earth into the stellar system, into the sun, and into the stellar system. And when we look at it here, we see that it accurately, very accurately, tracks the 4 cardinal points that Mkhulu spoke to us about. It accurately tracks the equinoxes, the spring equinox and the autumn equinox, and it also accurately tracks the solstices. So if we are to go to Inzalo-Yolanga right now, we'll see that the shadow of the sun has accurately, through the stones, has accurately marked where we are today as the winter solstice. What technology did our ancestors have to be able to create this? And I'd like to focus on the east here. Here is the eastern marker stone, which is the Heru stone, not the Horo stone, which is on the precipice of Inzalo-Yolanga. And it looks out upon 2 pyramids, which Mkhulu was telling us that we've got old pyramids. Unfortunately, they're on private land, bought land, and we cannot access, these pyramids that are our birthright as Africans here. And we also see that it is linked to Orion's belt, the constellation, which is the warrior constellation, for which Sirius is also attributed. So this site is at once attributed to the sun. It is once aligned, to the sun, but it is also aligned to the stellar systems as well. In directly opposite us, if we go into the west, that is where we have the western marker stone. And an interesting thing about the western marker stone is that during the apartheid era, it was removed, it was uprooted by the apartheid era, and they went and hid the stone. Why did they hide the stone? Because we know that it is the feminine stone. It is the one that's governed by the principle of water. What we also know is that Ubaba Credo Mutwa called it the clitoris of Mother Earth. Why was it the clitoris of Mother Earth? He calls it because if we go into the human body, remember our bodies, our cycles are the ones that tells us as above, so below, know thyself. It is the one organ or the one aspect of the body that has many, many sensors and receptors. And so this particular stone is the one that receives all the messages from the stars, which is why they would have taken it away so that they could deactivate the site, which carries so much of the knowledge. Here we are in Africa. And then here in the northern marker is the stone where Ubaba Credo Mutwa was initiated at the age of 16 into the mysteries of becoming a Sanusi. And so this calendar here is one, we just see another angle of it there, which shows us the cycles of life. And we see that the cycles are circular in as much as the cycles are triangular. We see that they merge in and out of each other. And this is what we have as the cycles that are animating us today. The oldest solar calendar, the oldest lunar calendar right here in Africa. Another depiction shows us where the summer solstice is and where the winter solstice is, where the altar stone is, where the northern marker is. All of this a greatly sacred site, which allows us to know ourselves as Africans, but to know the power that we hold if we come into alignment with it. Once again, this shows us it's aligned to Orion, it's aligned to Sirius, it's aligned to the stars. And that's another depiction. And this we have, in terms of the knowledge of the site, we can only give credit to our great ancestor, Vusamazulu Credo Mutwa. Inzalo-Yolanga. This was me at the equinox. I happened to pay a visit there, in order to honor the equinox. When we move up Zeb Tepi, we find another site, which is the Great Zimbabwe, which is a similar structure, also, which is aligned to Orion. I won't go into detail, which is also aligned to Orion, but which is, when we move up, we see that our ancestors started to perfect their art as they moved up the line of Zeb Tepi, into this, when we go into the science and the cosmology and the angles and the mathematics of the space, we'll see that it is equally aligned to the planets. And then when we continue up there, we finally reach our Great Pyramid of Giza. you know, which is the great empire, the culmination of the great empire of Kemet. And that is where we know that the greatest alignment with the stellar systems is found. Within the Great Pyramid, we have 3 chambers. We have a chamber beneath the earth, which is the subterranean chamber. We have the Queen's chamber. We have the King's chamber, and we have a number of shafts. For many, many years, Western scientists have not known what this pyramid did and why this structure was created. What were all of these structures for? And what they've come to realize is that this structure is directly aligned, for instance, with the Orion's belt, as we see there, which, guess what, Inzala is also aligned to. Thank you very much for that. We see the alignment there with the Great Pyramid here, right at the bottom. And then we also know that it is aligned to, the shafts are directly aligned to Sirius. They're directly aligned to Orion, directly aligned to Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, to Draco, you name it, whatever constellations are directly aligned, because what this pyramid does is it draws in the energy of the cosmos onto that particular site. And when it draws in the energy of the cosmos, we are able to drink and draw from this energy. So it is okay to go back to the past and learn from it. This is the principle of SANKOFA. And this principle of SANKOFA allows us to know thyself, to know that we are Oser, we are the principle of unity, to know that we are Tehuti, we're the principle of wisdom, to know that we are Sekret, we're the principle of power, to know that we are Ma'at, we are love, we're truth, we're divine law, to know that we're Herkuti, or in another form, Sekmet, the principle of the warrior, to know that we're Heru, to know that we're Heteru, to know that we're Sebek, to know that we're Anpu, to know that we're Oset, and to know that we're Geb. All of this is who we are if we come to know thyself. And once we do that, we can come together as African children, knowing that we have within us and within all our power, the knowledge and the ability to create and to impact the stellar system, because our bodies are the stellar system. Our bodies are the sun. Our bodies are the moon. And when we do that, then we know that, yes, I am because you are. I am because we are. And we say Ubuntu. We give thanks. Thokozani.